Hey everybody, what's up? I'm DJ Sixsmith. You're watching The Sit Down. Pat Kondelis is here with us. Outcry, the brand new Showtime docu-series. Pat, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing really well. So I was just telling you, I watched part one this morning, and there's a lot to the Greg Kelley story. And obviously, people in the Texas area know this, maybe not nationally in the same way, but when did you realize that this would be a docu-series? And I've heard you talk about how this was the most difficult thing you've ever done. So what were the biggest challenges in putting this whole thing together?
Everything was a challenge in putting this together, and I think it starts with the fact that this was when we jumped into this was an ongoing legal case, and we had no idea where this was going to go. We had no idea how long this was going to go, what the conclusion was going to be. We had zero control over any element of the story, so it was kind of just jumping in blind and hoping that something happens. And there was a very good possibility that nothing would happen. But what's unique about the story is that everything was surprising. Nothing in this story played out the way you thought it was going to play out, and everything about the story, from a investigative standpoint, from a prosecutorial standpoint, to everything was unique in this story. So it was quite a challenge. We did not know that this was going to be a 5-part. We had no clue. That was, probably 2 years into it. Even then, I don't think we were necessarily thinking that this was going to be a 5-part. So it evolved completely while we were shooting it. And I think the way the audience is going to experience this story is the way that we experienced it, which is a roller coaster.
So how long was the total production for you guys?
We were right at 3 years.
Wow.
3 years, yeah. And it was it's a local story. I live in Williamson County, which is the county that Greg Kelley was arrested and prosecuted in. And, they have a long kind of checkered history with the criminal justice system. So it was a personal story to me that once I really kind of dug into it and started speaking with people, the story, it kind of haunts you. And it certainly haunted me. And I just wanted to figure out what the hell was happening.
Yeah, I think there's so many different fascinating elements to the story because, like you mentioned, with Williamson County, the history there, obviously what football represents in that community, people being wrongfully convicted, and also like something I was thinking about just the last few years, it's like you look at a person and you think, no way, they never could have done something like this, and yet there can be more to that situation. So what was it like just unpacking those concepts?
It was very, very challenging because ultimately what we're trying to find is truth and clarity in the situation. And with this being a story about a high school football player that's accused of molesting a 4-year-old boy, it's a very, very emotional crime, an emotional case, and it's one that people on both sides of this issue feel very strongly, very firmly that they are the enlightened party. They are correct. The other side of this is wrong. So dealing with that was very, very difficult to find the clarity. And then the evolution of this, you just didn't know. There was no resolution throughout. It's not like telling a story that happened, in past tense and you're going back to dissect that. We were trying to dissect it in real time. So there was never a moment where it was like definitively you knew where this was going to land. You knew what had happened. You had seen all the evidence. It was kind of for us constantly digging to find that evidence and then saying, well, what else is out there that we haven't seen? What else don't we know? What's going to be this next kind of curveball that's going to come out the story? And there was plenty of those.
Yeah, it was obviously surprising how things evolved, but how surprising was it that Greg Kelley got convicted and was going to prison for 25 years, given the fact that there were initially 2 young boys, one of the boys recants his story, and you start off your docuseries with the boy telling the story. So what was most surprising just about the trial and just the conviction at the start?
I think the most surprising thing about the trial was that in my mind, looking at it, the whole case was reasonable doubt. The whole case was. You had the accusation, and that was the origin of the entire thing, and that's why we actually called it Outcry. Mm-hmm. The child's outcry saying this is what happened. It's from that moment that everything else, everything is spawned from that. And so trying to dissect that and figure that out was what was driving us. But I was surprised at the lack of investigation. I was surprised that 12 jurors looked at that original trial, and in the evidence, he said beyond a reasonable doubt. That was shocking, like so many other things of this story.
Yeah, and then another little underlying part is just Greg's family history in terms of what was going on with his dad and his mom, obviously dealing with some stuff too, and even just living in somebody else's house where there's a child daycare center. Like, if things are a different way in his family, he never even lives here. So what was it like dealing with that part of the story?
There's a lot, yeah, there's a lot of elements of it like that, right? Like, here's a fork in the road. What if something just went slightly the other direction? It would change everything down the line. I think it was, the Greg being the football star and where he was, and the fact that he had 4 scholarship offers to play college football, and he's about to go into his senior year when this accusation is made. That's amazing in itself, right? And unique that this guy who's well known, well liked in the community, was the football star in kind of a small town, is accused of doing something so unbelievable when he's, the momentum that he has at that moment is crazy. He's got everything going for him, and then this kind of this accusation happens, and it just destroys everything. So it was interesting at the way that his position at that time, how that affected everybody else, whether they believed he was innocent or believed he was guilty, right? Because he's a football player in a small town in Texas, just north of Austin. And the fact that he's a football player, I think a lot of people stood up and supported him because they knew him. That never happens when somebody's accused of molesting a child. Normally people don't want to vouch for them. They want to get as far away from that as possible. And in this case, people stood up and said, no, you have the wrong guy. There's no way he would do this. And then you have the people on the other side of that one, I think probably want to take down the football star, and then the media attention locally because he was a football star, I think added pressure to the police department, added pressure to the prosecution. And all of those things were kind of a perfect storm.
Everybody really digs their heels into their side. And like, even the gym owner, for example, like, he gets thrust into this trial and he says, like, no, I'm telling the truth. Like, if anybody disagrees with me, they're wrong. So how do you think that potentially swung things? Because suddenly here's a separate example of Greg potentially lying about being in the Marines and all that. How did that factor into things in your mind?
It did. And there was things like that throughout. Yeah. That it's in the absence of specific hard evidence, right? What do you have to go on? Right. And so that's a big theme that is explored throughout these 5 episodes is there's such a passionate position of innocence and guilt. And a common question that we had was why? Why do you feel so passionately that he's either guilty or innocent? What is the evidence that you can point to say that? Because even with that evidence, there's still going to be a question. And it's still going to be very difficult to find that clarity. And so that, that's the thing. Who's lying? Who's telling the truth? Who's right and who's wrong? And it's going to be interesting to see if any opinions are actually changed when this airs.
Did your opinion of Greg Kelley change once you met him in prison, talked to him, spent so much time with him?
Yeah, I really I didn't follow the story when it actually happened and when it came out. So I didn't really necessarily have an opinion when I went in. I was impressed with the way that Greg Kelley handled himself. And I asked him some very, very difficult questions. And anybody, again, he's in prison. We don't know each other. We've never met. The first time we're meeting is in prison. He doesn't know anything about me, and I got a camera crew there, and I'm going to ask him about these very intimate, kind of horrible details. That's a very difficult thing for anybody to go through. And I was impressed with the way that he handled that. I was impressed with his, how honestly he answered questions. And I was impressed with really everybody that gave us access to the story, and everybody, all had to answer very, very difficult questions on all sides of this, because there's nothing about this that's straightforward.
No, definitely not. And there's nothing straightforward about who to believe also, because I think that's one of the most difficult things right now in our society is like, Greg could be very believable to somebody, and then at the same time, it's just, no, he actually believes what he's saying, and it's not true. So I think that's what makes this so fascinating, is that you really have no idea who to trust or who to actually believe because of the lack of evidence overall.
Exactly. And then, it's also at a unique time in history where people might look at an accusation differently than they did previously. And what does that mean? And this is a serious accusation. Super aggravated sexual assault of a child in Texas. It's a 25-year prison term minimum with no parole. And it's something, if you're, there has to be evidence there to corroborate that accusation. And so that's where everything gets tricky in this case and interesting. And that to break it down from a legal set of circumstances, I think is hopefully fascinating to the audience.
So when do you feel like things started to flip for Greg? Because it's like this dude Jake comes in as an advocate, there's a new lawyer, there's phone records. How was this momentum starting, and how does it eventually get to overturning the conviction?
I think the momentum really changed for him when Keith Hampton became his new defense attorney after he had been convicted. Keith Hampton is a guy, I mean, I can't remember off the top of my head how many people he's gotten exonerated. It's something like 9 in Texas, which is just insane. So he's got a long history of appellate wins, big wins, in very, very difficult circumstances. And he's sort of an expert when it comes to these child sexual assault cases, and where those investigations can go wrong in child sexual assault cases. And they can go wrong very quickly and very easily. I think when Keith Hampton got on board, that's where there was some glimmer of hope for Greg Kelley, right? But that's very different with, there's the hope in the path of Greg Kelley, and then there's the hope in the path of the actual truth of what happened in the case. And they're kind of running on parallel lines here.
So I was reading up on kind of what happened in the last few years. So it seemed like there were potentially some other people that were in the mix. Like it wasn't just Greg, it could have potentially been something else. So like, what were some of the new facts that were brought forth that really changed things after this all kind of came to a head in court again?
There was a lot. I think the biggest thing, one of the biggest shocking things right from the beginning, and this was even known in his original trial where he was convicted, was there was really no investigation done. And when I say no, I'm not really exaggerating. There was literally...
They just arrested him. Yeah. Exactly.
An accusation was made, and then following arrest was made. And there was no real evidence to support any of that. That was unreal. And then kind of going through the timeline later of how that all came to be, and then seeing certain things that happened in the investigation, those are it's rare to get to see them. And you get to see them, you get to hear them in audio, you get to see them in video. And I think, all of those things, they become unbelievable. If I told you all the things that happened and all the pieces of evidence, crazy, I don't know if people would necessarily believe that that's the case. Seeing it and experiencing it with the proper context, it's mind-boggling. It's totally mind-boggling. And it's mind-boggling to say that this is not the only time that this has happened.
Yeah, wrongful convictions can happen all the time. It doesn't matter what you look like, who you are. And even with these true crime series, it's like you can do the deep dive, watch the episodes, spend the time researching, and you may not be any closer to the truth. Like you may just be closer to what actually happens. So do you feel as though at the end of all this that you've come to peace with it, or do you still have more questions about everything?
I still have questions.
What are your big questions you still have?
I'm still there. I guess one of the things that bothered me in this so much that I mentioned earlier was that everybody on both sides just is so damn convinced.
Yep.
They are the enlightened party, and they know the truth and the other side is wrong. To be that confident in what you know without being able to point to a specific smoking gun piece of evidence, I find very, very odd. So I do feel like we got very, very close to the truth. I think we exposed the truth in the story, but there were so many times in the story where you thought you knew what was going to happen and you thought you knew what was going on, only to be proven wrong. There's only so many times that can happen, where I think like us and my team, we're constantly asking ourselves, well, what else could there be that's out here, right? You don't want to land on something and have this conviction before you know for sure. You've looked at every piece of evidence. You've spoken to every person you can possibly speak to about this. And this is something that, again, that's so emotional, and it affected so many people in such a profound way. You don't want to be certain about something, prematurely. And that's kind of the theme of the whole story,
Yeah, no doubt. And I think it's an interesting time for it to come out too. Like, you guys were supposed to go to South by Southwest, and it was supposed to be a couple months ago. It's like, this could potentially be the next big deep dive for people. So what are the most important things to focus on as they watch 5 episodes and learn all about Greg Kelley and his story?
I think what we wanted people to come away with ultimately at the end, hopefully, is clarity in the truth of what happened. But we want them to experience that through every perspective and every piece of the puzzle. I want the audience to get the opportunity to kind of look at that in proper context and analyze that before the puzzle comes together and you see the whole image. So our point was, let's look at every single thing, good or bad, for whatever party. Let's break it down so that here's everything to deal with. And then, you're going to make that decision at the end of it.
Yeah, you guys went into it all. No rock was left unturned. Really enjoyed talking to you, Pat. Thanks so much. I'm looking forward to people checking it out.
Pleasure, DJ. Thank you very much.